All right, I'm going to call to order the May 28th, 2026 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission. And first item is approval of the agenda. Do we have any comments or anything that we need to change? All right, then I'll take a motion in a second.
Move approval.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And the motion carries unanimously. Next is approval of the minutes from the May 14, 2026 meeting. They looked very comprehensive to me. Anybody have any editorial? No? Okay, move. So I need a motion and a second.
Make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right, citizens' comments on the matters not on the agenda. There's nobody joining us today right now. So that is open and closed, and we'll move on to new business. We have an entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness 2026-05 request by Josie McChesney for approval of a certificate of appropriateness for exterior improvements to the Nature Conservancy at 517 East Nelson Street, tax map 30-1-8, which is owned by Messino LLC. Arnie, do we have a staff report?
Yes, indeed. And good afternoon, everyone. This is in an entrance corridor, so therefore they need the approval for the exterior improvements. This is for remodel, again, for the Nature Conservancy at 517 East Nelson Street. And you see the pictures there of the front of the building. And again, this is the old Buddy's True Value Hardware that's directly behind what used to be Wendy's and it was still behind Frank's. The first picture there in your packet on page 5, that's the front. And they're proposing a couple of windows, or I think 4 windows to be cut in on that elevation. And then we also showed you the other elevation that faces east. That's that second photograph where that garage door will be increased in size. And the doorway, the regular passenger person door, is going to be moved over a little bit to accommodate that larger overhead door. Since a general office use is permitted in the C2, it's not a zoning issue, but we do have the entrance corridor regulations. And out of all of those 5 categories, it's only the architecture that is applicable at this time. And we have those standards on the bottom of page 6 for your consideration. And for what it's worth, staff does find the proposed improvements meet the zoning criteria. If we look over on page 10, I think it is, which is hard to see because the numbers end up being so small. But this is the one that starts with the 2 photographs of the existing south elevation at the top and the existing north elevation. And just to show you that the existing south elevation, and that is the elevation that faces towards the Mexican restaurant, so into the hill, if you will. No improvements on that side. And the existing north elevation, again, this is the one that you see directly coming off of East Nelson Street, and you see the drawing at the bottom of the page there, which is sheet A 4.01. You'll see 4 new windows being proposed for that elevation. Over on the next page, the existing west elevation, this is over facing towards Cookout. No improvement, actually 1 improvement there, 1 window to be cut in. And then on the existing east elevation, again, the overhead door becomes a larger opening for a larger overhead door. And the entry door is just moved over to the right. Next page, a couple of window specs, fairly straightforward, simple windows, nothing too elaborate there. Page after that on 13, we do have a spec sheet for the doors. Of course, this won't be a loading dock as they're shown here. This is just a typical overhead door that you will drive into, and then some specs following that. This is not a particularly attractive building, so I don't know how to necessarily make it more attractive, but I don't think the improvements that are being proposed make it any less attractive for what that's worth. Happy to answer any questions.
So they're not painting the siding then? Okay.
or changing it in any way, correct?
You've asked that question and the answer was no. They've only provided us with fenestration, if you will, so doors and windows.
Right. And can we like tell us about this door? Because this looks very much like a truck loading door.
Yeah, I think I asked them that question and they said, no, that's just the manufacturer and the. We go back to page, I think it's 11. It's just a regular flat overhead door without any windows in it.
I see.
So I don't know why the spec sheet came in the way it did, but sometimes that's all they can get.
Sure.
And I'm not sure if your question was, this is a loading dock door for a tractor trailer to come back up to.
Right.
That's not what they're proposing to do. It's just a regular drive-in overhead door like you have on your garage
Okay.
if you have a garage.
Super. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't a change in that use.
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anybody have any questions for Arnie? Looks like we do not have the applicant here. Well, I think that we probably, let's see, we'll open it for public comment. And we'll close it up with no public comment. Anybody wanna? If nobody has anything to add, then I think we'll take a motion in a second.
I think just adding windows and reducing the number of gutters on the front, that alone's a big improvement.
Right.
So I move to approve the entrance corridor certificate of appropriateness application EC COA 2026-05 for exterior improvements at 517 East Nelson Street as proposed by the applicant.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? And motion carries unanimously. All right, moving on to PUD zoning text amendment. Arnie, we have a staff report.
The only thing we've provided you is the chart at the back, and this is perhaps a failing of mine when we were thinking about what we wanted to provide you in the packet. I thought putting all three sample PDs that we were going to review at you all's request into the packet would be too much, but then actually I realized after the fact that there's actually not that many pages to each one, so I probably should have included it in the packet. So apologies for that. I'm not sure if we have those available. I think we made you aware of that on Tuesday instead of Friday, but those are being posted or are posted for your review. And I think there was just a request to go and pull a couple samples. So we've done that, and sort of summary, a very cursory summary if it at best perhaps is on page 16, just to go through. And we have provided you the first two columns previously about the differences in the Lexington pre-2017 PUD regulations and that set of regulations that existed in Lexington from 2017 to 2022. And then now we added the other three columns for Albemarle County, Blacksburg, and Stanton. Now, sometimes it's not always an apples to apples comparison
Yeah.
because they're trying to accomplish different things. Stanton, I'll take as an example. They had this traditional residential development district, which is only for single family development and for nothing else. So that's not really an apples to apples, but they also had a traditional neighborhood district, which was more for creating a new neighborhood according to the new urbanist neo-traditional principles. So that wasn't exactly an apples to apples comparison either. So I just make that observation that these aren't always going to be exactly what we're trying to accomplish in our more flexible PUD regulations. I'm not going to go over any of these specifically unless you have questions. And again, this is just a quick summary. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have more specific questions about the actual code language from those three jurisdictions.
No, but it was helpful to have them to look at and get a sense for how different communities are addressing these issues. It did make me think about the need that we really want to be clear on what our intent is, and also I think having two different, types for smaller lots and for bigger lots, as we've talked about. I really do think that that's going to be helpful. in terms of making sure that we're getting what we want in Lexington. That's,
Yeah, and looking at them, I still go back to the pre-2017 version that we had, and I like the flexibility in the fact that it does address, looking how it was used for both small lots, and then it was actually used for developments. And I think that's still what we want. One thing about the PUD we had before was it limited to residential districts. I think we should include our special planning areas as well. Or I'd be fine doing R1, R2, RLC, RM, but also the special planning districts, because that is mentioned in the comprehensive plan too. I don't know, I sort of like to go, maybe start with that one and work from there.
what are your thoughts on this minimum area? So there's, in the pre-2017, there are none, but then in 2017, it was increased to 5 acre or yeah, there was a 5 acre minimum, and then that was reduced to 3 in 2019. So are you thinking that we wouldn't need any?
I don't think we need any. And I'll tell you, back in 2017, I pushed for, I think it was proposed, I can't remember if it was originally proposed for 2 or 3 acres by planning commission. And then when it got to council, I pushed for it to be 5 acres because I was worried about somebody coming in. You know, like my neighborhood, for example, I've got 2 and almost 2.5 acres. So, so maybe the limit was 2 acres. I thought, you know, people may not be happy if all of a sudden I did something out of the ordinary. But now, having been on planning commission, I see you go through this whole process of either redistricting or applying for an overlay. They'll get site plans. There's enough, I feel like there's enough safeguards that I'm not so worried about us running into a problem, setting a size limit. And from the examples Arnie and Brinsley gave us, there were some, I think it's useful for some small lots that we still have remaining, infill lots that may not meet our current development standards, that they should have a chance of being able to be developed if they come up with a good design.
I feel like we just want to make sure, like maybe take some test case scenarios on properties and say, okay, what if somebody came in and decided this was the property that they wanted to develop? What, and really apply whatever we come up with, because I think we still want to make sure that we're not going to end up being able to approve things, or, you know, having some future planning commission, recognizing that that commissions change, making sure that the intent of what we're wanting is clear. That's that would be my request, is that we really take a careful look at some spots in different kinds of neighborhoods, different in, you know, in R1 and R2, and I mean, all of them, wherever this would apply.
I think that's easy enough to do, and we can certainly do that in the sense that we already have the dozen or so that were provided to you as examples of what happened that were actually applied.
Sure.
Right.
So we have to make sure that it can still apply to those if that's what we want. And then we also have a couple of vacant pieces of property which we all are aware of and can think of how this could potentially apply to those. And we do have a sort of vast range between trying to carve out an extra lot on a driveway as opposed to on a public street. So a very small, simple, low impact thing all the way up to a 60 West.
Yeah.
Right.
So the range is
Right. That's sort of my point, though, is that if we're going to have one PDR that applies across the board to big and small, I think we just want to make sure that if we're not going to have any minimum area, and we're not going to have 2 different levels of application, then I think we just want, we owe it to our, to the people of Lexington, current and future.
think we can also write it in such a way that we don't necessarily have to have two, because I don't think we have enough developmental parcels that are potential for development or redevelopment where we need to have two separate districts, those for greater than 2 acres or those for less than 2 acres. I think we can write one. And we have a good example of that in that pre-17 version where it doesn't have a minimum lot size, but it does say, as an example, an open space for PUDs consisting of contiguous acres or more, total usable open space shall be at least 20%. So in those cases, when we have more than 2 acres, we can just write in if there are extra standards that are required for those.
So am I misunderstanding that? All right, I have a friend who lives on McLaughlin Street. There was a house next to her that was raised. So isn't that something that could happen on any lot anywhere in town? Somebody buys it and they're like, I don't really love this house. I'm going to take it down and I'm going to put up fill in the blank.
In your standards, in other words, as you already know this, but so just to review, it depends on how you write it. So if right now we're writing a lot of flexibility into it,
Mhm.
and we're going to say that all the uses that are residential uses in R1, R2, RM, maybe RLC, maybe the special planning districts, those uses are automatically allowed. And then if I remember correctly, that pre-17 also said in any conditional uses, and quite honestly, any other uses that are contemplated. But even though there would be a wide range of uses that are potential candidates for that parcel, there's also going to be the standards. So your criteria for reviewing and approving this are going to be incredibly important to gauge what could happen on a relatively small parcel where there was only one single family dwelling. And if somebody comes in and says, I want to put up 6 townhouses, then you just have to have the criteria established in such a way so that you have the support for denying that, if that is indeed incompatible.
And you're saying we could make those standards conditional on different sorts of sizes of properties, right?
Yeah,
Right, like that's part of what your argument is, correct?
you could do that. And then, as you know, from your other criteria for CUPs
Right.
and other things, they're fairly high level, open-ended,
Yeah.
that you can make an argument. But you can also make those more specific as you deem appropriate. So as stated before, you want to have the flexibility clearly and want to be able to say yes when it's appropriate according to the criteria, but you also want to be able to say no when it's inappropriate.
Right. And that's really, I just want to make sure that we are covering that base of being able to say no when, and have it be, clear to everyone why we would be saying no.
I'm admittedly a little bit unprepared in the fact that I thought we were going to have a longer discussion about the other 3. So if I had known that that would have been quicker, I would have had before you the old PUD, because that would be my recommendation to you, is that we use the old PUD from 90 to 2017 and use that as our structure for going forward, amending that as we see fit or as need arises for the things that we're trying to accomplish in this more modern version. And I don't have those copies for you unless you happen to have those from before. And so I'm not sure if you want to, do we want to talk a little bit about intent, but I don't have that in section in front of you to talk about intent. We're grasping at straws to see how we can have a discussion now that will be helpful in sort of promoting this.
Well, I think we could talk about intent generally, but it sounds like we're in store for a short meeting. So, I'm wondering if I have the old one. I did grab some things.
I only have one copy.
I do have one
unfortunately,
copy. I've
so
marked it up, but
So this is the one from 27. I have the 2017 one.
is
Do you want to just read it?
one other potential question. Is there anything that you particularly liked from Stanton, Blacksburg, or Charlottesville that you want to pull forward, or is anything that you particularly didn't like that we don't? I'm just wondering, since that is the purpose of this particular meeting before, and if we have time to jump into intent or anything else, Is there anything that you all would like to just comment on being particularly appropriate or inappropriate?
Seems like anything industrial in
Yeah,
a residential neighborhood would be
Mhm.
inappropriate. Um, there were a few things in the uses, yeah, medical office,
Mhm.
commercial gasoline station, grocery store. I mean, a neighborhood convenience store is fine. But I think we would just want to be very careful about the sorts of things. And I can see, having some of these, so the traditional neighborhood, that new urbanism thing I love. And I can certainly see having
Mhm.
those sorts of community centers or
Mhm.
in a neighborhood could be lovely. I mean,
Right, and I'm forgetting which, but like one of them allowed commercial but capped it at a modest percentage, right? Like 10 percentage of the area of the thing.
and it had to be ancillary
Yeah.
to the residential use,
Right,
so
yeah.
it couldn't
Right.
be like the primary use.
I thought that was kind of interesting, at least worth thinking about.
Okay. So perhaps when we're going through the old PUD and we're making changes, if there are any things that you want to bring forward, we
Mhm.
can do that at that time. So does it make sense now for me just to read the intent and purpose of that pre-2017, have a discussion about that?
Yeah.
And again, apologies for not being prepared and having copies for you at this meeting. So the old pre-2017 PUD first section, intent and purpose. The plan unit development concept encourages and permits variation in residential developments. Its intent is to permit greater flexibility in order to allow more creative, innovative, imaginative, and where possible, environmentally sensitive development than may be possible if the underlying zoning district's regulations are strictly applied. The PUD is intended to provide both for development flexibility of undersized parcels and to allow the use of diversified development techniques for larger parcels. The PUD overlay is intended to expand housing opportunities for persons of all income levels. And I have written maybe from our last discussion on this, which was April 9th, and protect neighborhood character. So that must have been mentioned perhaps at our last
right.
discussion.
Yeah.
What I particularly like is it has a PUD is intended to provide both flexibility for undersized parcels and to allow diversified development for larger parcels. So it has that sort of coverage that we may need for that range that we spoke about earlier.
And I think our task is a little easier than than what these other ordinances have, because we've already done the PDMU. So we
Right,
just are doing residential, so we
Right.
don't have,
Mhm.
yeah,
Right.
which helps.
that's right.
And I did like the last sentence, the PUD overlay is intended to expand housing opportunities for persons of all income levels or houses of all.
Didn't we recognize though that it's not required, it's a possibility though? Is that correct?
Yeah, and it says of all, yeah. I mean, just a variety. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe I would put set instead of saying income levels, put variety and
Right.
price range of housing.
Um, I mean, all of that sounds very good, and it's like to the good of the community. That all sounds. I'm not quite sure where we're gonna go with this. Actually, I sort of wonder if we want to just put a pause on the conversation, unless somebody else has something that they do want to talk about the intent. I mean, I think it might be helpful to, in some of these, you have provided us with the text and then possibilities of other texts, what other communities have done. I don't know that we need to do that, but it might be helpful to have these with us so that we can look at them all at the same time. I don't know.
Okay, we can provide that next time. So if it's okay with you all, we'll provide you with the old PUD and then as supplements add the three that we have, because it's really not as many pages as I thought initially. So that's not going to be an issue. Is there, other than getting an intent and purpose, do we want to talk about perhaps, since we have a little bit of time, sort of what we want to accomplish with this? It sounds like this is for residential development to allow flexibility for the small things, which we had a couple of examples, and I can pull what those were.
Yeah.
Where folks wanted to add one additional unit. They had 3 or 4 acres and they wanted to add one unit, but it wasn't on a public street, which was not allowed. So they used the PUD process for that extra unit, and they had plenty of area and it wasn't incompatible with the surrounding area, all the way up to, again, a 60 West or a Weatherburn style development. So is that still what everybody's in? And maybe if there's a little bit of flexibility for some neighborhood commercial use, if it's less than 10% and if
Yeah.
it's ancillary to the,
Although
but-
I'm not even pushing for that. I was just noting that that was an interesting thing about the ones you.
so primarily residential.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was so those examples that you gave, I recognize, there was also the one, oh goodness, behind the parking lot, just that way, just right down the street. I've forgotten, is that Cincinnati Lane? The one that had the townhouses where one faced one direction and one faced another. Wasn't that also done through the PUD process?
You talking about General's Retreat?
No. No, no, sorry. Like, where is it? It's on the other side of the parking lot down, that parking lot out back of this building.
Oh.
Wasn't that also one of the examples that you provided us? I probably don't have the street name right.
Yeah, it's not that street, but,
Where
is there a,
Laurel House?
the Project
Project
Horizon?
Horizon, yeah.
Yeah, where Project Horizon is
Yeah.
that where it was used?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think,
That's not one of our examples.
is it not? Okay, so I'm conflating that with something
Yeah.
else. So boy, I'm having,
What would
I'm
have been the-
clearly having a memory of some other conversation then. That where somebody used the PUD to find a use for a very small piece of property and use it in a different way, or develop it in a different way.
Yeah, I'm just gonna quickly go through the ones that were provided you on April 23rd as an example. So Weatherburn was one of them. Thompson's Knoll, which the city did with through threshold, multiple subdivision. I can't remember, 20 some units. We had something on Borden Road, which ended up being carved up into 5 lots, but keeping their back undeveloped. But that's not what actually was developed on Borden Road in the 500 block. 60 West. Lexington Commons, which are townhouses off of Lexington Avenue, very close to Weatherburn, but that was just a rear yard setback reduction for 6 townhouses to go in. South Main Street, we had the Doan property, which did not have frontage on South Main Street, and they carved an extra lot out there, which was not built on. Off of Houston Street is Chocolate Lane. There was a property that had already been created, but it lacked frontage on Houston or any public street. And in order to build on that one unit, they had to go through the process of a PUD. On Overhill Drive, we had 2 parcels in one house and a cabin. So they subdivided an extra lot. So that ended up being the 3rd lot so that the cabin could go on its own lot. Off of Enfield Road, 5.25 acre parcel, that had some frontage, but the second lot that they wanted to create did not have public frontage. So they split that. A house was built there. Over on the bypass off of Donald Street, they put in a duplex. And then we had this somewhat odd thing off of Borden Road, which from Stratford Lane, one parcel with a large Victorian style home and then a duplex up front, and then also some sort of building accessory that may have been an office, all on one parcel. The duplex off of Cincinnati Lane, that was Threshold.
That's Threshold. Okay. So
So maybe, is that
I think that's the one
perhaps?
I was thinking.
Okay. And then 60 West, and then that's it as far as what we found the thing that occurred to me today, I didn't go through the entire list to see what was denied, if anything, which might have been
That'd be interesting.
curious as well. Not just what was approved, but potentially what was denied. So we'll do that as well.
So the Sentinel Lane was that was a house threshold owned and modified or built?
So it says one lot does not front, the duplex was constructed on two parcels. One lot does not front a public street. There's no side yard setback on one side. There's a 20-foot rear yard was reduced to 18 feet. So it was like
Oh, yeah.
one of the duplexes faces the street and the other one faces the side.
Yeah, okay.
If the street's here in one lot, instead of having side by side duplex facing the street, they turned it sideways. So the first one actually has street frontage, but you have to go drive across that to get to the second duplex, which doesn't have street frontage.
Okay. Which brings up, was everyone here when Arnie explained that we don't really do variances? And because that's a situation where it made sense to build something, especially probably something more affordable, but we don't do variances,
Right.
so it was the only way to get it done.
Got it. I don't think I was here for that, but I know we don't do variances. It makes
Yeah,
sense.
right.
So the whole idea is to get flexibility in a range of circumstances, including small ones like that, that would be
Mhm.
handled with a variance in another locality, basically, right?
Right.
Am I understanding right?
But with the trick or the key rather being that you do it in a way that works in situ.
Right.
Totally. We
Right.
don't want this to be a way to get around variances, because there's a
Right.
reason for the variance procedure. but in
Absolutely,
the state of
right.
Virginia, the criteria are so difficult, it's almost impossible to grant a variance.
Right.
So I struggle a little bit because the townhouses off of Lexington Avenue got a reduction in rear yard setback from 40 feet to 25.
Hmm.
And that's the only thing they got. So sometimes I struggle, is that the appropriate use of the PUD? But if that unlocks that parcel, then maybe it is.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that I wonder about is if people sort of say, oh, wow, this is the way to make my house bigger.
Mm.
Even though I'm in a neighborhood where I'm supposed to, all of the neighbors have a house that, has the appropriate setback. But if people start saying, wow, well, I can just go through the PUD process. And if the planning commission is like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
before you know it, what's the point of the
Yeah.
zoning?
Right.
And that's why the criteria are going to be so.
That's right.
important.
That's exactly what,
And we have to
that's my point.
keep these scenarios in mind when we're doing that. Again, anything from a setback to unlocking a parcel that's not on a street, all the way up to a subdivision.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you also still, you don't want to lose the flexibility because was it
That's right.
Lexington House you were talking about that had reduced rear yard,
Lexington
backyard?
Apartments, or not Lexington House, but sorry, like on Lexington Avenue, there
Yeah.
are two sets of townhouses. One
Yeah.
of those needed a reduction in rear yard setback.
Because like in that case, I mean, I wasn't here when they did it, but they used to back up to an empty field. So it probably made sense, you're not so worried about the
Right.
rear setback when you don't have a neighbor. And then once you have a neighbor, now that they have neighbors in Weatherburn, that's how it's always been. So it's not a problem.
Right.
Yeah. So I do like the flexibility from that standpoint. I totally understand your point and I agree with it. You don't want to just have it be a workaround our rules, but there are times where it sometimes makes sense for a certain piece of property to allow some flexibility. Right.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So,
Just like the variance process has 5 or 6 actually very strict criteria, we're still going to have criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sure, of course. Right.
they're not going to be as strict. So we just have to rely on them, whatever they end up
Right.
being.
Right.
But this is why we need to be real clear about intent, because the criteria basically
Right.
is meant to codify the intent, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like the purpose is primarily, if not exclusively, for residential, for flexibility.
Yeah.
And the intent and purpose statement we can go through at the next meeting,
Yeah.
along with provided all of the other ones, the 3 samples that we have. And then we can sort of do that
Yeah.
composing with that. In addition to just the intent, the purpose and intent, I would like to make perhaps a little bit more progress at the next meeting. So I think we also have to look a little bit at structure.
Mhm.
So let's talk about intent and purpose to make sure we know what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And then maybe look at structure just as far as what are the headings, is this the right structure that we want to use? I think there are things in the old PUD that we can get rid of just because it's codified somewhere else in the
Mm.
code. As far as process procedure, advertising for public hearings, we can make references perhaps. And then maybe if we can have a discussion about structure, what are there other elements, not specific language necessarily, but structurally, are there things in the other codes
Mhm.
that we want to sort of put into ours?
Okay.
So maybe intent and purpose and structure.
Yes, I think that that all makes sense. And can I ask you to put that into the packet instructions? You know, please review this for the following things. I think that'll be a good reminder because, 2 weeks from now or a week from now, when you send it out, other things will have happened to distract us
Yeah.
from this conversation.
It's hard to wait 2 weeks. In the old, the 317 ordinance has, it is an overlay.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the overlay keeps the underlying districts
Right.
rules, and then we changed it to, and after that to, district.
Right.
Mhm.
And the benefit, I'm saying this, but I'm also looking for confirmation.
Mm.
And the benefit of doing that was it allowed more flexibility. Is that?
For me, it's simplifying it. So, and also the last page, just to point out that that was the only one that was the overlay. The
Mhm.
newer version that we had was a zoning district, and so were the three others that we're looking at. I would prefer if you, you would like that it become a district, because I'll use the example more from the institutional overlay, how seemingly simple of a concept that is,
Yeah.
but how
Yeah.
complicated it gets in implementation quickly with the university and with the underlying R1 zoning district, and what's the height and where do you measure height from?
Mhm.
So in our PDMU already went to a district. It's not an overlay. So I would just recommend, to be consistent, we go with a district.
And then, so say, for example, say we wanted to keep R1 and R2 stricter, like one of the requirements in the old one was that the density should be no greater than the specified in the underlying district. If we wanted to just do that, say in R1 and R2, and for RLC, RM, and special planning areas, allow flexibility and density, what would be the best way to approach that?
Structurally, we'll have to figure that out.
Okay.
In the section we're talking about density, or, we'll just have to figure out how to weave that in.
Okay, so we could do it with either type, an overlay or we could do it, no, I'll take away that question. We could do it with making it a district. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
I would still like there to be the option for flexibility, but if we want to cap, and right now we have suburban standards, so minimum lot sizes for R1. There are so many historic parcels that don't meet the minimum lot size.
Yeah.
So I don't want us perhaps to get too hung up on the density that we have currently, because I think it's not really reflective of some of the density that we already have in the more historic areas of the city where we have the smaller lots.
Okay.
But maybe it's worth doing a maximum in R1 and R2. We cannot go over X number of dwelling units per acre,
Okay.
or, just
Right.
having a cap of some sort. I don't think we're going to add a lot of flexibility if we just say can't do more than what's in the underlying zoning district, because
But that's,
Right.
but that's also where if you have a certain amount of acreage. I mean, like, I'm looking at a zoning map, and for example, the property around the water tower,
Mhm.
Mhm.
lot of property. And it would actually be a pretty good place for somebody who wanted to go in and say, hey, I want to, put in something 60 West adjacent, for example. So you don't necessarily want to put caps on it. So I guess I just wonder if what we want is, also, maybe they're caps, but unless you have a property that's
Yeah.
a certain acreage.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, that seems like it ought to be possible, right? Can I back up even a little bit more just to make sure that I'm understanding? So having it be a district, if I understand correctly, what that means is if we allowed this in R1, R2, and, RLC and the rest, somebody would come and they'd say, okay, here's my proposal, right? And we would review it. And it would, if we approved it, it would essentially become its own district, right? Like that little unit, it wouldn't really be part of R1 anymore, even though it was in R1, correct?
You change the zoning from R1
To this, basically.
ADR.
Exactly, right. And so then, but so when we set up the regs for this, we could put all kinds of, we could we could constrain ourselves in the future by making flexibility conditional on other features of the property, whether it's in R1 or R2, how large it is or anything else like that. I'm not suggesting we make it super complicated, but I just want to make sure I'm grasping correctly. We could do it that way and we could address some of these kinds of concerns that way. Yeah.
You're not going to use the overlay, and I didn't say this, but
Yeah.
if you're not going to use the overlay, then you've got to pull forward the standards that you are going to use.
Right.
Or develop the standards that
Develop
you are
them,
going to
right.
use. Or lot
Including
size, density, all
Right.
those, height,
Setback.
all those things.
Wow.
That-
But we
But-
could make those condition. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, we could
yeah.
make those conditional on things, right? Sorry.
Yeah, so it, in my opinion, it doesn't help us to add flexibility by them saying maximum height.
Yeah.
It's going to be, or,
Yeah,
maximum density, right? You want to have some flexibility above and beyond what you already have in your traditional zoning districts.
Yeah.
But how do you do that without going like overboard?
Yeah.
Somebody comes in with, I don't know, a 15-story building. Well, it says I can have much
That's right.
flexibility as I want.
That's
So
exactly it.
and it's going to be up to you a little bit on how you're sort of, how comfortable you are with writing that. Again, we need to have the flexibility, some standards, maybe bookends, backstops, whatever you want to call them, but allow the creativity and then just have the criteria written in such a way. I think that's going to be probably the most important part of this
Mhm.
is having the criteria, again, when you can say yes and when you can say no.
Got it.
I'm not convinced that an overlay, I know that it makes, I mean, I feel like I'd like to understand better how an overlay is worse because it seems like we would want to maintain certain things.
Another way that it's not as helpful is you always have to reference back, okay? I'm
Mhm.
pulling from R1, so I've got to go look at R1 as well and
Mhm.
understand that whole district, which isn't that hard. But then you got to understand that, and if there are any inconsistencies, then how do you handle that? As opposed to having it all in just one place, very similar to what we did with PDMU. We developed what was allowed in plan development mixed use. So I think it's just more self-contained if you do it as a district and all the regulations are in one section.
Mhm.
So if it's a an over, or sorry, if it's its own zoning district, but it's on top of R1, can it be a different? I mean, it can like John was saying, we could say, if you're in the, if this property is in R1 and it is a certain acreage and it is surrounded by, I don't know what, you can sort of say, then could you say, or if it's under a certain acreage, then the standards of R1 apply for height, for example. Could you say that?
Instead of saying that, why not just say what the standards of height are?
Okay.
Instead of making that reference and having that potential confusion. And then you're going to have criteria that say something to the effect of it has to be compatible with surrounding properties. So
Right.
so you're going to have to look not just at what it is, what the parcel is zoned now, and it's going to be going to this more flexible thing
Yeah.
that's going to be tied to its own site plan because you're going to come in for a development plan review. So that will be a thing known and they will get tied to that. And we already know what's surrounding it. And then the other point to that is we also shouldn't look at just what's surrounding it in the sense of what's existing on the properties today, but what's allowed on the property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is a difference in that a lot of times. So they still have the right to develop additional height. They just chose to do a one-story building at this point in time. But that's a small change or a small point to make. So maybe the confusion is if John has a piece of property, he's currently R1 and he wants to go to something else, it will be to the planned development residential or whatever we call it. It
Yeah.
will no longer be R1.
Right.
Mhm.
So it will be its new thing, but it'll have a very specific site plan for the 3 duplexes or whatever it is. With the setbacks, with all that baked in, and it's kind of what you see is what you get. And if he asks for 2-person daycare within that, if we allow that kind
Yeah.
of thing, then that's what is allowed specifically for that parcel. And in the review of that, we know, I mean, it's parking spaces, we know what the adjacent uses are and what's allowed on the adjacent uses in the zoning orders and even to a degree in the comprehensive plan. So you have to take that into consideration to see whether or not this new thing is compatible.
Remind me what we did with cottage housing. Did we just make that an allowable use in R1 and R2? That's not a district. is it?
DUP everywhere.
Yeah, right. But it's, you don't rezone, you just get the CUP.
Right.
That's what it was, yeah.
I'm not mistaken, we also said if we have a few of those under our belt, we could potentially make it by right.
Right,
But
we
we
did.
wanted
That's
to
right.
have-
That is right. Yes,
But
yeah.
we haven't
I do
gotten there
remember
yet, have we? Cottage, where's my cottages? Cottage housing development, conditional use in R1, R2, RM, and RLC.
Yeah.
How many properties is this impacting? I'm wondering, like, why are we doing this now as opposed to some other thing that we might be working on? I'm
One of the things is potential flexibility for the 2 city-owned parcels, Spotswood and VDOT.
right.
Not that we have anything specific, but just looking forward to development. And I don't want to say this incorrectly, but maybe last time we were too specific about what we wanted. And that didn't work out for multitude of reasons, not just because of the uses that we chose. But this is a mechanism to allow additional flexibility. And then also forgot that in one section of our comprehensive plan and doing the reads through all the strategies, one of them does, I'm going to paraphrase horribly, that says allow an extra lot on the back of a parcel if it has sufficient size or something. So this is a component of also trying to accomplish something that's in comprehensive plan as a strategy.
I guess I'm sort of wondering if that, I mean, those are both big properties. I know that not the other one, but we're talking about having flexibility on these bigger properties. And I just sort of wonder if,
Another sort of argument for this is over the state legislature over the last number of sessions, they're concocting things in Richmond, such as all single family zoning districts have to allow 3 dwelling units, so there will be more density in the future imposed upon us, likely. This is also a mechanism to get ahead of that a little bit for us to say in a plan development text how we can potentially add additional density. Then also open up that missing middle, which we used to have, and again, missing middle or well, not so much duplexes, but triplexes, fourplexes,
Yeah.
townhouses, other things, other housing types.
Mhm.
Where we primarily have a stock of single family detached. Now, primarily there are certainly some apartments, but how do we allow that missing middle housing types back in?
Mm.
This is a mechanism for that too.
I mean, if I'm understanding the way that I'm looking at this, if I'm on the right page, is very much in the spirit of what Leslie was saying at the beginning. I mean, it's we've got those 2 properties, right? The 2 city-owned properties, right? And then we've got like these little infill opportunities. And the hope is that through one initiative here, we can create flexibility that allows for sort of efficient redevelopment of both kinds, right? And that's the real crux of the question. I think, is
It
is
is.
one instrument do accomplish both of those objectives, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, it's possible to have all kinds of, conditions to set up regulations. We're going to say carry over rules about height and setbacks and everything else based on the size, based on the district. But an alternative way, you can do a little of both for sure, is just to preserve the flexibility that you were talking about at the beginning, to just really, really get the criteria, right? So intention to purpose to criteria that we would use, which then, as you know, does involve trusting ourselves and future planning commissioners to, be judicious in
It is.
using those criteria.
Absolutely. It's also a lot of work to get but from where we are right this minute to this finished
Mm.
zoning ordinance. It just sounds like, and so I just want to make sure that, I mean, if we're going to be working on the criteria for every possibility for, I mean,
Well,
The criteria are more general. right?
yeah,
It's like,
we don't need to say if it's on a corner lot, then the house has to face this. So it's not that
Sure.
level. It's much higher level than that.
but we might want setbacks and height and,
Let's take two examples of the rules or the PUDs that we have. In our old PUD, if you will, the original one that we have, there's very little. It does reach back and say use the development criteria in the underlying zoning district. So it does come with some standards,
right.
certainly.
Yep.
But there's not much else other than that in here as far as standards. And if we grab one of the other ones, then they get into setbacks and they get into very specific criteria. So then my point is you're losing the flexibility. Why be that stringent if that's what you're trying to get away from
Right.
in your underlying or your traditional zoning districts?
so the criteria you have in mind are more like principles, right? Understanding correctly?
And just, where are they?
Really, on this one, the only thing it did carry over was the density. And that I'm saying maybe is too tight to restrict. But I mean, this worked for a long time. It'll be interesting to see if it's easy to pull up what ones were denied, but
Yeah.
we really didn't get any problems with this.
right.
Can you remind us why it went away? Like that's,
I wish I had a better understanding. When I first started 10 years ago, I was trying to learn the current code. And then at that same time, we were doing a wholesale rewrite of the zoning ordinance. And I'm losing within that year and a half process why we went from what we had to that middle PUD, which was significantly different. I mean, it went from just residential to allowing residential, commercial, and industrial, if I'm not mistaken. And so it just opened it up, and then we had no applications for that that came in for us to consider in that 2 to 3 year period. So I'm not really recollecting in that entire rewrite why we jettisoned the PUD that we
Well, and
had originally.
didn't the Berkeley group, they proposed that. I mean, it didn't come from planning commission. It was part of the
Package.
yeah, exactly. Right. And they said, well, this will give you more flexibility for things, but it wasn't really what we needed.
Right.
Since we don't have that much land to develop.
Right.
So just to go through some of the criteria, and I'll stop whenever you want me to. So the objectives of an application review, and this is in that original PUD, to encourage design and amenities to those resulting from the strict application of the underlying zoning district and the city's subdivision regulations. Number 2, to encourage innovative arrangements of buildings and open space to provide efficient, attractive, flexible, and environmentally sensitive. So this sounds like a lot of the intent section even. It's
Yeah.
just that open-ended.
Yep.
But again, I would argue that what we ended up as far as developments, if it's just a subdivision or a lot split or weather burn, it's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? This, even with this sort of high level, non-specific criteria. Number 3, to encourage the development of a variety of housing types. 4, to encourage the clustering of single-family dwellings for more efficient use of land and the preservation of open space and significant natural features. Number 5, to enable developments designed to function as cohesive, unified projects. Number 6, to ensure that development harmonizes with existing adjacent properties, uses, and development patterns. And then I also have written in, maybe from our previous conversation, harmonizes with the character of adjacent properties and through materials, mass, height. There was some other notes I'd scribbled, maybe from a previous discussion. Number 7, to ensure preservation of cultural features, scenic assets, natural features such as floodplain streams, natural drainage ways, wooded areas, steep slopes, or other areas of sensitive or valuable environmental character. So, and then there's 4 or 5 more. Just so it is, and we can certainly, as needed, make those more specific. But as you can see, that's still a fairly high level.
And again, I think that we would just want to take some properties and say, okay, what if somebody did this and they, it's like, think about what any of us in this room wouldn't want next door or in our neighborhood. So for example, you might not want, I don't know, a 15-story building with reflective glass, for example. And how, is that allowed? And just sort of, do some testing.
Well, I don't think we're gonna have criteria that says you can't have you should not have a 15-story building with reflective glass. But I would imagine that if we have 7 people up here, 5 are you gonna say, no, that isn't compatible because of these more general criteria. So I'm not so sure that we have to go that specific, that this should cover most situations.
I think we need to just make sure.
Yeah, no, I agree. And
I'm
again,
sticking to my guns here.
and again, in our memory, we know the ones, the dozen or so, and we can keep in mind Spotswood and VDOT and the parcel behind Mountain View Terrace. That's a potential development site, or the
The water tower.
water tower.
Mhm.
The property directly behind the water tower, that's 12 acres. They're going to develop one house on it, and there's not much we can do. But there's some property part of the water tower. But yes, we can keep those in mind and calibrate this as needed.
Right, but not just the big properties. I mean, there are lots of, I mean, even if we chose to do a minimum of a half acre, for example, in order to have a 4-story building, you have to have at least a half an acre, for example. I mean, I think that we need to really just make sure.
That's a decision you all have to make as far as flexibility versus standards.
Yep.
Where do you want to land in that sort of field?
I think that that's correct. I don't think that, I don't necessarily perceive that 100% flexibility is what we want or need. Not that some flexibility isn't good, but I don't think we need to have absolutely anything being allowed.
I'm kind of inclined towards the idea of, I mean, I agree with everything everybody said. Trying to have some really well articulated general criteria that could be used by a planning, and then like testing them
Yeah.
through examples, like saying, okay, if somebody came to us and said, I want to propose this thing, because of course we can't think of every possible
That's
thing
right.
that we wouldn't, right? But if you can think of a few and say, are we confident that a planning commission would say no to this thing that everybody would want to keep out, but then maximize flexibility otherwise, which we really do need a lot of flexibility, I think, and just protections against what you're rightly concerned about. Am I making
Yeah.
any sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
So I like the general criteria idea rather than trying to like legislate, so many design details that we just are back where we started or worse.
It's almost like if we imagine like the weirdest, biggest thing we could do on our property, can we do it?
Right, right,
Right? Is it possible? If
Right.
not, awesome.
right.
Right?
Yeah,
Right? So.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And also, property owner has the right to submit an application.
Sure.
right,
But we also have the right to say no when
right,
it's inappropriate.
right.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily happen that often because property owners have an expectation that they bought this property and they would like to do whatever it is that they want to do on this property, and they've prepared all of this, all of these designs, and they put a lot of effort and money into it, and so it can be hard to say no, I think.
Well, we'll just have to say no when we think it's appropriate.
Yeah, but
We already have the by right thing. So the traditional zoning districts are going to still be there. So if somebody wants to spend their money and do a development and do the by right process, they already have that.
Yeah,
Baked in
sure.
the R1, R2, RLC, whatever they want to do. So this is just to unlock those other properties and to, again, provide that flexibility when it's deemed appropriate. But this is going through the legislative process. So it's going to be an opportunity for public input at public hearings. So what we're going to trade off there is they get perhaps more flexibility for whatever it is they're proposing, and we get to see that upfront. It's not just a rezoning to RLC and then they do whatever the design criteria are for that, and we don't know. We get to see the development. We get to approve or deny the specific thing that's in front of us.
Mhm.
So that is actually on a master plan, if you will,
Mhm.
and that's the benefit to this.
And they're also gonna have to explain why they're not doing it by right, particularly for like a single lot. You know, why aren't you building a house that fits on there?
Maybe that's a good point to add into the application process, explain why the by right does not
Yes.
work.
Mhm.
For sure. And sorry, this thing this law that's coming through the legislature, does it have a name?
No, that's
Or
been
it's a
proposed several
process?
times and hasn't been adopted
Sure.
yet, but there's a push across the entire country to get away from single family zoning where there's only one house allowed on one lot.
Mhm.
Other states have already approved that, and I think at least 2 or 3 times it's already been in front of our
Mhm.
legislature as a proposal. And we're better set up than most because in R1 we already allow duplexes, we allow accessory dwellings attached and detached. In R2 we allow accessory dwellings attached and detached. So I don't think it's gonna be as much of an impact for us, but there have been proposals to turn single family zoning into more units than just the one.
I'm sorry, into,
More units
Yeah.
than just the
Yeah.
one.
So mandating at the state level, basically, that you couldn't have, you know,
It's no longer
Single
deny
family.
of something.
single family, like,
Locality actually approved that right around us. Shoot, now I'm blanking on who it was. It was Roanoke. Was it Roanoke? And anyway, new council came in and public was in an
Mhm.
outcry and
Right.
they've gotten
Right.
rid of that.
Repeal that? There was some hiccup and I can't remember. Did
Yeah,
they
I
go
thought
back
they're
and repeal?
repealing it.
I can't remember.
I have to go back and look. I was reading that article.
but all of these state and national, like these state level things are designed, they may be too big or whatever, people could have critiques of them, but they're designed to confront some of the same problems that we're trying to confront, and that are articulated as goals in our comprehensive plan, right?
Right, but they're taking out the locality's ability to
Right,
let.
right.
Well,
Right.
that's it.
So it's, right.
but if that happened at the state level, wouldn't Dylan's rules require that? I mean, that would get rid of all of our single family zoning. Is that correct? Because it would be more restrictive?
I'm not sure how it would play out, but we could not, under the new rule, let's say you have to have at least 3 dwelling units per single family lot. Allowed, so we
Allowed.
could not deny something, so we'd probably have to go back and rewrite our
Right.
single family zoning districts, R1 and R2. To figure out how to accommodate whatever the new state law is, which is what the Dillon rule is telling us.
Mm.
Have to do what the state
Right,
enables us or limits us to. But we're not gonna be as bad off as if you can think of any jurisdiction that has a lot of suburban development.
Yeah.
One house,
Mhm.
one lot, and that's it, and all of a sudden now perhaps they have more land area in those situations than we do. But it's a very coarse tool, mind you, and I'm not
Mhm.
sure how it's gonna be. actually
Yeah.
done.
And when you say a lot is, of what size?
Ones that we already have.
Whatever they have. So if it's a half acre lot, you have to be able to have 3 houses or 3 dwelling units. And if it's a 3 acre lot, same thing.
I don't think it's based on new lots. I think it applies to what you currently have on the ground. So all of our R1 and R2 potentially would have to have 3 units. Now, we already allow that in the sense that we allow in R1 duplex and we allow an accessory, so that's not so bad.
Mhm.
R2, we might have to do a little bit of fudging to catch up if that whoever does get adopted.
Wow.
But there are pushes for that across the entire country.
Yeah.
And at least 2 proposals, and there were a lot of weird ones in the last session for residential in particular.
Okay, everyone. Have we parsed it enough for the day? Is there anything else that you would like for us to,
No, I'm just gonna review if that's okay so that I
Sure.
understand. So one thing that we'll provide for you at the next one is the old PUD and then 3 copies of the sample ones from the other jurisdictions. We'll go back through the list of the old PUD to see what was denied potentially. because I didn't think to do that before. I've only given you the ones that have been approved.
Mhm.
And then we're going to put together, or we're going to sort of review that purpose and intent statement, and then also talk about the structure. So not just purpose and intent, and not getting into text necessarily, but sort of how do we want to structure this? See if we can't figure ways to do that. And then following a meeting after that, actually get into putting the text in the appropriate places.
That sounds good to me. Everybody else? Okay, and then you're gonna give us a little bit of this is what we're gonna be talking about. You're just gonna put all that into the email, please. Or
Instructions, yes.
that I think will be very helpful. All right. Well, that was sort of the staff report and the commission discussion. Is there any public comment? Okay, opened and closed. Other business, do we have a zoning and planning report?
Just to mention that we have advertised for a public hearing for the comprehensive plan on June 11th for you all.
Great.
And we will have the final draft from the PDC tomorrow.
Okay.
So that'll be put up. There were only some changes, I think, from two of you that need to be incorporated in that final draft. And we will have that up on our website and also have a copy for anybody who wants to come in and take a look at it. So your meeting on the 11th will be that public hearing for the comprehensive plan review.
Super. All right. Do we have a city council? Sorry, anything else? Okay, city council.
No, we did not meet.
All right. Well, before we adjourn, I wanted to say thank you for putting up with all of those questions and comments. And I think that this is going to be a very robust conversation about these planned residential developments. Okay, then I think all we need is the motion and a second.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor?
I.
All done. I love hitting that thing.
It
It's very satisfying.
it
It's
is.
over.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arnie.
See you in 2 weeks, everybody. Nice to see you all. I feel like I missed this,